Sometimes the world hides its greatest miracle behind the door everyone refuses to open. On the night of the royal moon gathering, when every noble family across Mooncrest Kingdom proudly prepared to present their daughters before the Alpha King, one young woman stood alone in silence behind the last locked door of the Hawthorne estate. Clara Hawthorne had learned long ago that the sound of celebration was never meant for her. From the small attic window, she watched elegant carriages covered in silver lanterns disappear one after another toward the distant palace, their wheels rolling across stone roads that shimmered beneath the brightest full moon of the year. Music drifted through the crisp autumn air from villages below the hill, where children laughed, merchants decorated the streets with glowing ribbons, and hopeful families whispered that tonight destiny might choose the kingdom's future Luna. Clara rested one hand against the cool glass and smiled, not because she expected to be part of the celebration, but because she genuinely hoped everyone else would find happiness. Downstairs, the Hawthorne mansion overflowed with excitement. Servants hurried through polished hallways carrying embroidered cloaks, jeweled gloves, and carefully wrapped gifts, while Lord Hawthorne reminded everyone that the family's honor depended upon making a flawless impression before the royal court. Lady Hawthorne adjusted every detail of Olivia's elegant ivory gown, praising her eldest daughter with quiet pride. No one spoke Clara's name. They never did on evenings like this. A heavy key slowly turned inside the attic door. Clara closed her eyes as the familiar sound echoed through the room before the footsteps disappeared again. The lock had become part of her life so many years earlier that she no longer counted how often it was checked. Instead of allowing sadness to grow inside her heart, she turned toward the tiny wooden table where bundles of freshly gathered rosemary, lavender, mint, and thyme filled the room with gentle fragrance. Earlier that morning she had cared for the hidden garden behind the estate, the only place where she had ever felt completely welcome. Flowers never asked why she remained unseen. Birds never wondered why she watched festivals through distant windows. Nature simply accepted her exactly as she was. She carefully tied another bundle of herbs before placing it beside several worn books that had become her closest companions through countless quiet evenings. Every story reminded her that courage was not always loud, and that kindness often survived in places forgotten by the world. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Before Clara could answer, the door opened just enough for Eleanor, the elderly housekeeper who had raised her with unwavering affection, to slip quietly inside carrying a tray of warm vegetable soup and fresh bread. Her gentle smile immediately softened the loneliness filling the room. "You should eat while it is still warm," Eleanor said softly. Clara thanked her with sincere gratitude before noticing that the older woman seemed unusually thoughtful. Eleanor slowly reached into the pocket of her apron and removed a small bundle wrapped in faded white linen. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she placed it upon the table. Clara carefully unfolded the cloth and discovered an exquisite silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Ancient engravings circled its edges with remarkable craftsmanship unlike anything she had ever seen. "It belonged to your grandmother," Eleanor whispered. "She asked me to keep it safe until the night when hiding you would no longer be possible." Clara looked at the pendant in quiet confusion before lifting it into the candlelight. The silver reflected tiny flashes of moonlight spilling through the attic window, as though it recognized the night outside. "Why tonight?" she asked gently. Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion. "Because your grandmother believed destiny always arrives when people have almost stopped waiting for it." Clara slowly fastened the pendant around her neck. The cool silver rested lightly against her skin before gradually becoming warm, almost like the steady beat of a quiet heart. At that exact moment, the deep palace bells echoed across the valley, their solemn voices rolling over forests, rivers, and distant mountains until they reached even the forgotten attic where Clara had spent so much of her life. She stepped closer to the window once more, unaware that far beyond the glowing lights of Mooncrest Palace, another destiny had already begun searching for the young woman everyone else had spent years trying to keep hidden. Clara remained standing beside the narrow attic window long after the palace bells faded into the distance. The silver crescent pendant resting against her heart continued to hold a gentle warmth, not uncomfortable, but comforting, as though it carried a quiet promise she could not yet understand. She slowly looked down at the ancient engraving circling its edges, tracing each delicate line with her fingertips. It was beautiful in a way that seemed untouched by time. She wondered how her grandmother had come to own something so extraordinary and why Eleanor had waited until this particular night to place it in her hands. Questions filled her thoughts, yet none of them disturbed the peace she had learned to protect within herself. She carried the empty soup bowl back to the small wooden table before opening the worn journal she had kept for years. Inside its faded pages were pressed wildflowers collected from every season, little sketches of birds that visited her window, recipes Eleanor had taught her, and quiet reflections written during nights when loneliness became too heavy to carry in silence. She gently added one more sentence beneath the date. Perhaps even forgotten lives are seen by someone beyond the stars. A small smile appeared across her face before she carefully closed the journal. It was never anger that filled those pages. It was hope. Every morning Clara woke before sunrise to tend the forgotten garden hidden behind the old stone wall of the Hawthorne estate. She watered herbs, replanted flowers damaged by heavy rain, rescued fallen bird nests whenever she could, and thanked every new blossom as though it were an old friend. She believed beautiful things deserved kindness whether anyone noticed them or not. The servants occasionally watched from distant windows, quietly admiring the young woman whose gentle heart had remained untouched by years of isolation. Eleanor often said that Clara had somehow learned to bloom in the very place where most people would have given up. Those words returned to Clara now as moonlight stretched across the wooden floor beneath her feet. She carefully arranged bundles of lavender and rosemary to dry before opening the tiny window, just enough to let the cool autumn breeze carry their fragrance through the room. Beyond the estate, fireworks from distant villages briefly colored the night sky in soft gold and silver. She imagined children laughing beneath those lights and families sharing warm meals together. Rather than wishing she could join them, she whispered a quiet blessing that their happiness would last. It was a habit Eleanor had taught her long ago. When your own heart feels lonely, pray that someone else never has to feel the same. The pendant suddenly became warmer again. Clara instinctively placed one hand over it as a gentle breeze carrying the scent of cedar forest drifted through the open window. The fragrance felt unfamiliar yet strangely comforting, as though someone far away had unknowingly stepped into the same moment beneath the same moon. She closed her eyes and listened. Somewhere beyond the hills, another palace bell echoed softly across the valley. At nearly that exact moment, many miles away inside the magnificent halls of Mooncrest Palace, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood paused in the middle of the royal ceremony. Surrounded by noble families, elegant music, and centuries of tradition, he slowly turned toward the northern windows overlooking the distant countryside. A quiet expression crossed his face, one that Elder Rowan recognized immediately. The king was listening to something no one else could hear. Ethan remained perfectly still as the faint scent of cedar and wild lavender lingered in the evening air for only a heartbeat before disappearing. He had sensed that same mysterious presence before, always beyond reach, always hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Elder Rowan noticed the change in the king's silver eyes and quietly asked whether something was wrong. Ethan answered without looking away from the moonlit valley. Someone who belongs beneath this moon is missing. Those simple words would soon change not only the course of the royal moon gathering, but the life of the quiet young Omega, who still believed she was destined to remain unseen forever. The magnificent grand hall of Mooncrest Palace fell into complete silence after Ethan's quiet declaration. Hundreds of nobles looked toward one another in confusion, uncertain whether they had heard the Alpha King correctly. The musicians slowly lowered their instruments, and even the servants standing along the marble walls stopped moving. Elder Rowan stepped beside the royal throne and studied Ethan's expression carefully. During decades of service, he had learned that the king never interrupted an ancient ceremony without reason. "Your Majesty," Rowan asked gently, "has the moon oath revealed something once again?" Ethan continued looking toward the towering northern windows where silver moonlight poured across the polished floor. "It has not revealed something," he answered calmly. "It has revealed someone." Quiet whispers spread throughout the hall. Noble families exchanged uncertain glances while several young women lowered their eyes, wondering whether they had somehow disappointed the king. Ethan slowly turned back toward the gathering, his composed silver eyes moving across every family present. He showed no arrogance, no impatience, only thoughtful certainty. Every invited household answered the royal summons, announced one royal steward, attempting to reassure the assembly. Ethan remained silent for a brief moment before asking a single question. Did every household present every daughter? The question settled over the grand hall like a sudden winter breeze. Lord Hawthorne felt his heartbeat quicken. His confident posture stiffened almost imperceptibly while Lady Hawthorne quietly clasped her hands together. Olivia lowered her eyes, unable to ignore the truth she had carried silently for years. Elder Rowan immediately noticed the subtle change in their expressions. Ethan stepped down from the raised platform where generations of Alpha Kings had presided over the royal moon gathering. His measured footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. The moon gathering is not simply a royal tradition, he said, his calm voice reaching every corner of the chamber. It exists so that no worthy soul chosen by destiny remains unseen. He paused before continuing. Tonight, destiny is incomplete. The silence became even deeper. Elder Rowan slowly unrolled one of the ancient ceremonial scrolls and reviewed the official registry of noble households. His experienced eyes carefully examined every name before stopping upon House Hawthorne. He looked toward Lord Hawthorne with quiet curiosity. According to the royal records, Rowan said, House Hawthorne has 2 eligible daughters. The nobleman's face lost its remaining color. Our younger daughter has never participated in court functions, he replied cautiously. She has lived a private life away from public ceremonies. Ethan's expression did not change. Was that her decision? Lord Hawthorne searched for an answer that would satisfy both truth and reputation, but no words came. Olivia finally raised her head. Although nervous, her voice remained clear. No, Your Majesty. The confession echoed throughout the hall. Ethan nodded once, not in judgment, but in understanding. Then the ceremony cannot continue. Several nobles looked surprised, yet none challenged the king's decision. His reputation for wisdom had been earned through years of fairness rather than fear. Ethan turned toward the captain of the royal envoys standing near the palace entrance. Ride immediately to House Hawthorne. Escort every eligible member of the family to the palace with the respect owed to guests of the crown. The ceremony will wait. The captain bowed deeply before leaving with several royal messengers. As the great palace doors slowly opened, a cool breeze carrying the scent of cedar and wild lavender drifted through the chamber once again. Ethan quietly closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. The mysterious presence felt stronger now, no longer distant, no longer impossible to find. Many miles away, inside the quiet attic overlooking the moonlit valley, Clara gently touched the warm silver pendant resting against her heart. She could not explain why tears suddenly filled her eyes, or why hope, a feeling she had carefully protected for so many years, now seemed brighter than ever before. Outside the Hawthorne estate, the sound of approaching horses echoed along the stone road, carrying the royal summons that would open the final locked door of her life. The sound of approaching horses grew louder until it echoed throughout the quiet Hawthorne estate, replacing the peaceful silence that had filled the house only moments before. Clara stood motionless beside the attic window, her fingertips resting gently upon the warm silver pendant as the royal carriage entered the courtyard beneath the glow of the full moon. She could not see every detail from where she stood, but the silver crest displayed upon the carriage doors left no room for doubt. The palace had come. Downstairs, hurried footsteps filled the hall as servants rushed to open the great entrance doors. Lord Hawthorne straightened his formal coat before forcing a calm expression that could not completely hide his growing uneasiness. Lady Hawthorne quietly folded her hands together while Olivia looked toward the staircase leading to the attic, already knowing why the royal envoys had arrived. The enormous wooden doors slowly opened, revealing 3 royal messengers wearing deep blue ceremonial cloaks embroidered with the silver emblem of Mooncrest Palace. The eldest envoy stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Lord Hawthorne, by direct command of Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, we have come to verify every eligible member of House Hawthorne before the royal moon gathering continues. Lord Hawthorne returned the greeting with careful politeness. You honor our family with your visit. My household has already fulfilled its duty to the crown." The envoy calmly unrolled an official parchment bearing the royal seal. According to the royal registry, House Hawthorne has 2 eligible daughters. Silence immediately settled across the entrance hall. No servant moved. No one spoke. Even the fireplace seemed quieter than before. Lady Hawthorne lowered her eyes while Olivia gently closed hers for a brief moment. Lord Hawthorne hesitated before answering. "Our younger daughter has never participated in public ceremonies. She has lived privately for many years." The envoy remained composed. "His Majesty has specifically ordered that no eligible daughter may be excluded from tonight's gathering." Lord Hawthorne attempted one final explanation. "She is not prepared for court." The envoy answered with quiet certainty. "Preparation is not the question before us. Presence is." Those words carried unexpected weight throughout the mansion. Upstairs, Clara quietly stepped away from the window as she heard familiar footsteps climbing toward the attic. The key turned slowly inside the old lock before the door opened. Olivia stood there alone. For several moments, the sisters simply looked at one another, separated not by distance, but by years of silence. Olivia finally spoke, her voice gentle and filled with regret. "The Alpha King has stopped the ceremony." Clara blinked in surprise. "Why?" Olivia smiled sadly. "Because he believes someone is missing." Clara looked down at the silver pendant resting against her chest. "He does not know me." Olivia answered softly. "Perhaps he does not know your name, but somehow he knows you should be there." Before Clara could respond, Eleanor quietly entered carrying a carefully folded garment wrapped inside soft white linen. She placed it upon the bed with trembling hands before slowly unfolding the fabric. Beneath the candlelight appeared an elegant midnight blue gown embroidered with delicate silver vines that shimmered like flowing moonlight across still water. Clara stared in astonishment. "It belonged to your grandmother," Eleanor whispered. "She believed you would wear it on the night your true path finally began." Clara gently touched the beautiful fabric, hardly believing it had been waiting for her all these years. Eleanor carefully helped her change into the gown before fastening the silver pendant neatly above its graceful neckline. The moment the clasp closed, the pendant grew warm once more, brighter than ever before. Eleanor smiled through quiet tears. "Now you look exactly as she always hoped you would." Minutes later, Clara slowly descended the grand staircase wearing the gown for the first time. Every servant stopped what they were doing and looked toward her with quiet amazement. No expensive jewel outshined the simple dignity upon her face. Outside, the royal carriage waited beneath rows of glowing lanterns. Clara took one slow breath before stepping forward. She did not know what awaited her at Mooncrest Palace, but for the first time in her life, the door that had always been locked behind her had finally opened, and destiny patiently waited beyond it. The royal carriage rolled steadily through the towering gates of Mooncrest Palace as countless lanterns illuminated the marble courtyards beneath the brilliant full moon. Clara remained quietly seated beside the window, watching the magnificent castle rise before her with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. For years, she had imagined the palace from the distant attic window of the Hawthorne estate, believing it belonged to a world she would never enter. Now every stone tower, every silver banner, and every glowing window stood before her with breathtaking beauty. She gently touched the silver pendant resting above her heart. Its warmth had never completely faded since Eleanor had placed it around her neck. The carriage finally came to a smooth stop. Palace attendants dressed in elegant ceremonial uniforms respectfully opened the carriage door. Lord Hawthorne stepped out first, followed by Lady Hawthorne and Olivia. Clara hesitated for only a heartbeat before stepping onto the polished marble courtyard. A cool breeze carrying the scent of cedar forests and fresh autumn air brushed softly across her face. It was the same mysterious fragrance she had noticed inside the attic room only hours earlier. She instinctively looked toward the palace entrance where enormous silver doors stood open beneath crystal chandeliers that filled the grand hall with warm golden light. As the Hawthorne family entered, hundreds of conversations gradually faded into silence. Noble families from every region turned their attention toward the unfamiliar young woman walking quietly behind Lord Hawthorne. Curious whispers spread gently through the gathering crowd. Some guests quietly counted the members of House Hawthorne, realizing there had always been another daughter whose existence had remained hidden. Others simply stared at the remarkable contrast between Clara's humble dignity and the graceful midnight blue gown that seemed almost touched by moonlight itself. Clara lowered her eyes, not from shame, but because she had never experienced so many people looking at her at once. She remembered Eleanor's gentle words before leaving the estate. Walk with kindness. That is something no one can ever take away from you. Holding those words close to her heart, she continued forward with calm, measured steps. At the opposite end of the magnificent hall, Ethan Blackwood remained standing beneath the ancient moon crest carved into the marble wall behind the royal throne. He had refused to resume the ceremony despite repeated requests from royal advisors. Elder Rowan quietly stood beside him, observing the entrance with patient understanding. The moment Clara crossed the threshold into the grand hall, Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. Time itself seemed to grow still. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above them while moonlight poured through towering stained-glass windows, illuminating the polished marble floor stretching between them. Ethan's silver eyes found Clara instantly. He did not glance toward Lord Hawthorne. He did not acknowledge Olivia or the assembled nobles. His attention settled completely upon the quiet young woman whose presence had called to him across the kingdom. Clara looked up almost instinctively, and for the first time their eyes met. She expected curiosity. She expected judgment. Instead, she saw calm recognition and genuine respect. The warmth inside the silver pendant suddenly grew stronger, and Ethan felt the same quiet certainty settle deep within his heart. Without hesitation, he stepped away from the royal throne. Every measured footstep echoed softly throughout the silent hall. Nobles instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path between the Alpha King and the young Omega who had spent her life believing she was meant to remain invisible. No one dared interrupt the moment. Even the musicians remained perfectly still. Ethan finally stopped only a few feet from Clara. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. There was no fear in his expression and no pride in the way he stood before her. Only quiet kindness. Then, with a gentle voice heard clearly throughout the grand hall, he asked the simplest question Clara had ever been given. "May I know your name?" Clara slowly lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with growing courage. "My name is Clara Hawthorne, Your Majesty." Ethan repeated her name almost as though he had been searching for it much longer than either of them understood. Around them, the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath, sensing that the true beginning of the evening had only just arrived. The grand hall remained completely silent after Clara spoke her name. Ethan looked at her with the same quiet certainty that had guided him throughout the evening, as though the answer he had been searching for had finally stepped into the light. There was no haste in his movements and no spectacle in his expression. Instead, he offered Clara the simple dignity of being seen without judgment. Elder Rowan slowly approached, his attention drawn to the silver crescent pendant resting against her gown. The ancient advisor studied its delicate engravings from a respectful distance before his eyes widened with unmistakable recognition. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "that pendant carries the seal of the guardian bloodline." A wave of surprised whispers spread through the gathered nobles. Clara instinctively looked down at the pendant Eleanor had entrusted to her only hours earlier. To her, it had always been a treasured family keepsake. She had never imagined it might hold any greater meaning. Rowan continued examining the ancient markings illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the stained-glass windows. These symbols have not been seen publicly for generations. They belong to one of the oldest families sworn to protect the balance of the kingdom. Ethan slowly turned toward Lord Hawthorne. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. "If your family possessed such a legacy, why was Clara hidden from the world?" Lord Hawthorne lowered his head, unable to meet the king's eyes. Years of carefully guarded decisions suddenly felt impossible to defend. After a long silence, he finally answered, "We believed her existence would bring uncertainty to our family. We feared that revealing her heritage would create conflict over inheritance and reputation. We convinced ourselves that hiding her was the safest choice." Clara quietly listened without interruption. Although the truth hurt, she could also hear genuine regret in her father's voice for the first time. Ethan remained silent for several thoughtful moments before asking another question. Did anyone ever ask Clara what life she wished to live? Once again, no answer came. The absence of words spoke more honestly than any explanation. Olivia stepped forward with quiet courage. She was never given that choice, Your Majesty. Ethan nodded gently before returning his attention to Clara. Then I would like to ask you now. His silver eyes reflected both kindness and respect. When you imagined your future, what did you hope for? Clara seemed surprised by the question. She looked around the magnificent hall before answering honestly. I never dreamed of power or titles. I only hoped that one day I could walk through a door without feeling that I needed permission to exist. I wanted to care for people the way Eleanor cared for me. I wanted to help wherever I was needed and live without anyone being ashamed of my presence. Her quiet sincerity settled over the hall more deeply than any grand speech. Several nobles lowered their eyes in thoughtful silence. Elder Rowan smiled gently, recognizing that true nobility had revealed itself through humility rather than status. Ethan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Kindness like yours cannot be inherited, he said. It is chosen every single day. The silver pendant reflected another gentle beam of moonlight, and for the first time in many years, the ancient symbol of the guardian bloodline seemed less important than the character of the young woman wearing it. Standing before the entire kingdom, Clara no longer appeared as someone hidden by fear, but as someone whose quiet strength had been waiting patiently for the right moment to be recognized. The quiet silence lingering throughout the grand hall felt different now. It was no longer filled with uncertainty, but with careful attention, as though every person present understood they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered long after the royal moon gathering had ended. Ethan remained standing before Clara without allowing anyone else to speak for her. For the first time in many years, the young Omega was not being defined by whispers, assumptions, or decisions made in distant rooms. She was simply being invited to tell her own story. Ethan slowly turned toward the assembled nobles before speaking in a calm, steady voice. Tonight, no title will speak louder than truth. I ask every person here to listen with respect. The hall became perfectly still once again. Ethan looked back at Clara, offering a reassuring smile that carried quiet encouragement instead of pressure. If you are willing, tell us about the life you have lived. Clara drew a slow breath. Her hands rested gently together as she searched for the right words. There is not much to tell, she began softly. Most mornings I woke before sunrise to care for the little garden behind our estate. I watered flowers, gathered herbs, repaired broken branches after storms, and read old books that Eleanor shared with me. I believed every living thing deserved kindness because kindness was the one gift that never became smaller when it was shared. She paused briefly before continuing. I watched festivals through my window instead of joining them. I celebrated birthdays quietly with Eleanor. I learned not to ask why certain doors remained locked because I thought accepting my place would make life easier for everyone else. Several nobles lowered their eyes, visibly moved by the simplicity of her words. Clara smiled gently, without bitterness. Even so, I never believed the world was cruel. I believed there were still good people beyond the walls I could not cross. That belief helped me remain grateful every day. Olivia quietly wiped away tears while Lady Hawthorne covered her mouth, overcome by regret. Lord Hawthorne remained motionless, listening to the daughter he had never truly known. Elder Rowan folded the ancient ceremonial scroll and looked toward Clara with sincere admiration. A heart like yours protects the kingdom more faithfully than any sword, he said quietly. Ethan stepped one pace closer before carefully removing the royal cloak fastened across his shoulders. The deep charcoal fabric, embroidered with silver symbols representing every united pack within Mooncrest Kingdom, shimmered beneath the crystal chandeliers. Without ceremony or dramatic display, he gently placed the royal cloak across Clara's shoulders. The elegant fabric rested naturally over her midnight blue gown, and the silver crescent pendant reflected the moonlight with renewed brilliance. A quiet gasp spread throughout the grand hall. No one questioned the meaning of the gesture. It was not an announcement of power. It was the public restoration of honor. Ethan faced the assembled nobles once more. No person should spend a lifetime believing they must remain hidden in order to deserve respect, he declared. From this night forward, Clara Hawthorne will never again stand in the shadows because someone else fears the truth. Warm applause slowly rose from every corner of the hall. Palace attendants, Musicians, advisors, servants, and noble families joined together, not because they had been instructed to do so, but because compassion had quietly united them. Clara looked around the magnificent chamber, overwhelmed by a feeling she had never experienced before. She was not being tolerated. She was being welcomed. As the applause echoed beneath the towering ceiling, the ancient silver pendant resting against her heart shimmered gently beneath the moonlight once more, as though it recognized that the promise carried through generations had finally been fulfilled, and a forgotten voice had at last become impossible for the world to ignore. The warm applause gradually softened until a peaceful silence once again embraced the grand hall. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty or judgment. It was the quiet stillness that follows the moment when truth has finally been accepted. Clara stood beneath the crystal chandeliers with the royal cloak resting gently across her shoulders, still unable to believe that the same hall, which had once seemed so distant, had now become the place where her voice had finally been heard. She looked down at the silver crescent pendant resting against the elegant midnight blue gown. Its gentle glow slowly faded, leaving only a quiet warmth against her heart, as though it no longer needed to guide her, because she had finally stepped into the life that had always been waiting beyond the locked door. Lord Hawthorne slowly walked toward his youngest daughter. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The proud nobleman who had spent years protecting his family's reputation now stood before the daughter he had failed to protect. He lowered his head with sincere humility. "Clara," he said quietly, "I believed I was preserving our family's future, but I only succeeded in taking years away from yours. I cannot change what has already happened, and I know forgiveness cannot be demanded. Still, I hope that one day I may become the father you deserved from the beginning." The entire hall remained silent as Clara looked into her father's eyes. She remembered countless evenings spent watching celebrations from the attic window, the locked door, the quiet meals shared with Eleanor, and the little garden where hope had somehow continued to bloom. Those memories would always remain part of her life, but she realized they no longer controlled her future. She answered with calm sincerity, "The past cannot be rewritten, but tomorrow has not yet been lived. I do not want my future to be built from pain when it can be built from kindness instead." Tears quietly filled Lady Hawthorne's eyes as she stepped forward and gently reached for Clara's hands. Clara welcomed the gesture without hesitation. It was the first embrace between mother and daughter in many years, simple, quiet, and filled with emotions that words could never fully express. Olivia smiled through tears before wrapping her younger sister in a warm embrace. "I should have stood beside you long ago," she whispered. Clara smiled gently. "You are beside me now, and that is where we begin." Elder Rowan watched the family with peaceful satisfaction before turning toward the assembled nobles. "Tonight, every person in this hall has witnessed that compassion restores what fear can never protect," he said. "Let this evening become the example carried into every household throughout the kingdom." Ethan quietly stood beside Clara, allowing the family their moment before speaking. His calm voice carried naturally through the magnificent chamber. "Strength is never measured by how successfully we hide another person's light. It is measured by how willingly we help that light shine." The nobles responded with respectful applause once more, joined by palace attendants, musicians, advisors, and servants alike. No one applauded because tradition required it. They applauded because they had watched dignity restored before their own eyes. Clara slowly lifted her gaze toward the moon shining through the towering stained glass windows. For the first time in her life, its silver light no longer felt distant. It rested gently upon her face as though it had been waiting all along for the moment she would finally step into it without fear. Standing beside the Alpha King, surrounded by people who now saw her true worth, Clara quietly understood that the greatest victory of the evening was not that the kingdom had discovered her, but that she had finally discovered she never needed anyone's permission to believe she belonged beneath the same sky as everyone else. The first rays of sunrise slowly reached the towers of Mooncrest Palace, replacing the silver glow of the full moon with warm golden light that spread across the kingdom below. Clara stepped onto the grand stone balcony beside Ethan, the royal cloak resting gently over her midnight blue gown while the ancient silver pendant lay peacefully against her heart. It no longer glowed with mysterious warmth because its purpose had finally been fulfilled. The door that had remained closed for so many years was now only a memory, and before her stretched an endless horizon filled with possibility. From the balcony, she could see rivers sparkling beneath the morning sun, forests awakening with birdsong, and villages where families were beginning another ordinary day without knowing that hope had quietly rewritten the future of the kingdom during the night. Ethan stood beside her with calm confidence, never attempting to stand before her or speak for her. Instead, he offered the same quiet respect that had changed everything from the moment he first looked into her eyes. "The kingdom will remember this morning," he said softly. Clara smiled as the gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar and wildflowers across the balcony. "I hope they remember kindness even more." Elder Rowan stepped onto the balcony, carrying the ancient ceremonial scroll that had witnessed countless royal moon gatherings through the generations. He raised it toward the morning sky before speaking the traditional blessing. "May every hidden heart find the courage to step into the light. May every family choose compassion over fear. May every ruler remember that true strength begins with seeing the worth that others overlook." Palace bells rang joyfully across Mooncrest Kingdom, their clear voices traveling through forests, valleys, and distant villages as a new day officially began. Below the balcony, Lord Hawthorne, Lady Hawthorne, Olivia, Eleanor, royal advisors, palace attendants, and countless citizens looked upward with admiration rather than curiosity. Clara realized that she no longer needed to hide from anyone because she had finally accepted the truth that Eleanor had quietly believed all along. A person's value is never determined by the opinions of those who fail to understand them. It is revealed through kindness, patience, courage, and the willingness to keep hope alive even during the loneliest seasons. She gently placed one hand over the silver pendant before looking toward the sunrise one final time. The forgotten Omega, who had spent years watching the world through a tiny attic window, now stood beneath the open sky beside the Alpha King, not because destiny had changed who she was, but because the truth had finally allowed the world to see who she had always been. As the golden light filled every corner of Mooncrest Palace, Clara understood that her greatest victory was never becoming visible to the kingdom. It was learning that she had always been worthy of standing in the light. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable journeys. Give this video a like to support stories that celebrate kindness and courage. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and leave a comment telling us which moment in Clara's journey inspired you the most, and whether you believe compassion has the power to change a person's destiny.